Magandang araw po. Annyeonghaseyo. Welcome to the public lecture titled An Overview of North Korean Sources of Documentation Related to Religious Studies. I am A.J. Lazarito from the University of the Philippines, Tacloban College, and I will be your moderator this afternoon. Today's event is part of UPKRC's regular activities, and we hope this time will be fruitful for all of us to gain new knowledge and insights. We recognize the presence of Dr. Kyung Min Bae, the director of the Korean Research Center at the University of the Philippines, and Dr. Patricia B. Arinto, Dean of the University of the Philippines, Tacloban College. Before we start, let me briefly introduce you to UPKRC. On April 27, 2016, the University of the Philippines launched the Korean Research Center, aiming to provide Filipino scholars and researchers with opportunities to widen their interest in Korean studies. The center hopes to be a venue for students and professionals to produce meaningful comparative research and to promote collaborative partnerships among Korean and Philippine institutions. The center serves as a university wide hub that helps promote and develop Korean studies and sponsors interdisciplinary and inter-college research and educational activities, as well as facilitates the training of the next generation of Koreanists in the country. For today's lecture, we would like to acknowledge UP Tacloban's partnership with UPKRC. The University of the Philippines Tacloban College, established on May 23, 1973 by the UP Board of Regents, is a leading public institution dedicated to delivering quality education in the Eastern Visayas region. With a mandate to cultivate socially responsible graduates, advancing research and public affairs, and provide technical assistance to support regional development, the college began its journey with only 141 students enrolled into undergraduate programs. Today, it has grown into a dynamic academic community with over 1,400 students enrolled in 10 undergraduate and 2 graduate programs across 4 academic divisions. As an autonomous college within the UP system since April 2003, UP Tacloban is poised to further strengthen its role in regional development and move towards becoming a full-fledged constituent university. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dean Patricia B. Arinto for the opening remarks.
Good afternoon, everyone. In Waray, may I greet you in Waray, the language of Eastern Visayas, in particular this part of Eastern Visayas, Tacloban City. Maupay nga kulog, paaton nga tanan. We are very pleased here in UP Tacloban to be co-hosting this afternoon's special online lecture with the Korea Research Center. As mentioned, this is an offshoot of our desire, our interest to go into more Korea-related studies, no, here in the University of the Philippines, Tacloban College. And I would like to thank the Korea Research Center under the leadership of Dr. Bae for inviting us to be here. I want to also thank our speaker in this afternoon's lecture. And Dr. Levy, we're here for an interesting conversation on a very interesting topic. We don't know very little about North Korea, and this would be a kind of a view into something that we hardly ever see or notice, and it's of particular interest to us in academe. Without further I'd just like to say that again, thank you for the opportunity to co-host this, and welcome to all of our participants. Thank you very much.
Before we begin our program, we would like to remind our viewers of a few important guidelines. You can send your questions and comments to our speaker throughout the event using the comment section of the Facebook and YouTube live streams. These questions and comments will be read during the open forum and addressed by our guest speaker. We also want to emphasize that this forum is a safe space and we do not tolerate any form of bullying or trolling, whether academic or otherwise. The organizers reserves the right to remove anyone who disrupts the program in any way. Thank you for your cooperation. So now it is my pleasure to introduce our esteemed speaker today. Dr. Nicola Levy is an assistant at the Institute of Mediterranean and Oriental Cultures of the Polish Academy of Sciences, where he specializes in the religious and cultural dimensions of North Korea. He holds a PhD in social sciences from the Institute of Political Studies, also under the Polish Academy of Sciences. With deep expertise in Korean affairs, Dr. Levy has authored 9 books focused on North Korea and serves as a consultant on Korean issues for various international organizations. In addition to his research and consultancy work, he is the editorial secretary of Acta Asia Varsoviencia, on one of the leading academic journals on Asian studies in Europe. He also leads several projects exploring the evolving relations between North Korea and European countries. Let us all welcome Dr. Nicola Levy for his lecture entitled An Overview of North Korean Sources of Documentation Related to Religious Studies. Dr. Levy, the floor is yours.
Good morning to all of you. I hope, or good afternoon, it depends where you are present. I get that in Philippines it's currently around 3 p.m., whereas in Europe, where I am currently, it's approximately a nice evening around 9 o'clock a.m. in the morning. First of all, I would like to kindly thank you for inviting me in order to be able to present some output regarding my latest research. I would like, first of all, to thank the Dean, Patricia Arinto, for her words, for her introduction, dealing with underestimated, I continue to underline it, underestimated North Korean studies. The following, I would like also to thank, naturally, Dr. Kyung-min Bae for giving me the opportunity to share some of my research. And of course, I would like to thank all of those who participated to the organization of this meeting, including Pamela Jacker, Pamela Jacker, Madame Lazarito, and any other who are with us and that I have involuntarily omitted now. And of course, I would like to welcome those who would like to hear a couple of words, not only about North Korean studies, but also about religious studies in the framework of North Korea. I'm also happy to see that there is an important center of Korean studies in Filipina, taking into account that the relationship between Filipina and the Korean peninsula are, let me say, quite uncommon, taking into account, among others, the fact that Filipina participated under the umbrella, naturally, of the United Nations to the Korean War. Some Filipino soldiers were sent to the front on the Korean peninsula. We need also to consider that in spite of having no embassies in Pyongyang in North Korea. Philippines were the fifth country which recognized the communist, let me say, Korean part of the Korean peninsula. And Philippines is one of the major trading partner of North Korea. According to Daily NK, it is the third partner of North Korea by trading, among other, a large amount of food products, including bananas. There are no, as I said, there are no diplomatic representation of Philippines in North Korea. However, North Korea tried to open an embassy in Manila in 2010s. It's impossible as of now to maintain such diplomatic relation as naturally Philippines comply with the sanctions which are applied toward the North Korean regime due to its hazardous, let me say, nuclear policy. Well, after these short presentations where I wanted to underline the importance, let me say, of Korean studies in Philippines by taking also in account that the Philippine language, Tagalog one, is taught at the Pyongyang University of Foreign Studies. I would like to go more deeply, or at least start with the topic that I was supposed to develop within this session, within this invited lecture. The title of my presentation is as follows: an overview of North Korean sources of documentation related to religious studies. I will not represent myself, as it was perfectly done by Madame Lazarite a couple of minutes ago, and I would like to go deeper immediately into the subject. When we do speak about religious documentation in North Korea, what I will have to do in a first, let me say, overview will be to present, to discuss whether religious studies, whether religions were present in the geographical, let me say, perspective of the northern part of the Korean peninsula. As of 2025, we do have a certain, let me say, wrong perception of what is North Korea. Of course, North Korea, and we must admit it, is a quasi-totalitarian state. Quasi-totalitarian does not mean that the state in itself is able to control each field, each part of the society. Of course, based on a certain number of organizations, based on a certain, let me say, methodology originating or extirpated either from the Soviet Union or from the China of Mao, the North Korean state in itself is able to control the major, let's say, major parts of the society, but not fully. And of course, the North Korean state lead a terrific policy toward its citizens, which force some of them to defect abroad. One of them is Hwang Jung-yup, a former ideologist of the North Korean ideology, the Juche. By the way, when he defected, he moved from China to South Korea via Philippines. But what I mean here is that there is a certain control of the society which is applied in North Korea, but we cannot say in any fact that the society is totally controlled by the North Korean state, simply as it is not possible. Of course, in the 60s, some people would say that bikes were made forbidden in North Korea because people on their bike were able to think on their own. But of course, as of 2025, that is no more actual. It's true that at the beginning of the 70s or late 60s, when North Koreans were seeing foreigners, they were to some extent afraid of them. They were not able fully to discuss with them, except, of course, some selected North Korean. But again, as of 2025, and in the context of the recent Pyongyang International Marathon, which took place a couple of weeks ago, this kind of reality is no more actual. Contact or either interactions between the North Korean society and foreigners are possible, are tangible, but unfortunately, on a long-term perspective, cannot be maintained due to the limited possibilities for North Koreans to travel abroad. This limitation when it comes to traveling abroad, to some extent, was also applied to South Korean citizens until, I would say, approximately 40 years ago, more or less. So we have a specific overview of North Korea, which absolutely cannot be compared to a totalitarian state, but to a quasi-totalitarian state, which also use some of its assets that it should not use, of course, for the development of its economy. Which kind of assets I am referring to? For instance, the trade of its military technology. Secondly, the utilization of its cyber capabilities, which jeopardize some foreign institutions, not only in South Korea, but also in Europe, including Poland, and also in the US. Thirdly, the trade of illicit products, such as drugs, such as software malwares. Of course, the main problem is that all of these items taken all together are financing a regime which, to a large extent, is not satisfying the wishes of the population. In a such framework, in a such context, we must consider, we should discuss whether are there any form of opposition. When I have the occasion of discussing with North Korean defectors, one of these discussions was even published, if I may say, in my latest book published in French. I was a North Korean diplomat, translation in English, j'étais un diplomate nord-coréen, j'étais diplomate nord-coréen. In this book, my co-speaker, who was the North Korean diplomat in Vietnam, An Kim-myung, used to say that North Korea should, or Kim Jong-un more precisely, should open the windows more precisely to foreign influences which may have an impact on the population. By opening windows, we imply the possibility of having a foreign influence which may not lead to the collapse of the state of North Korea, I underline it, but to dramatic changes in the policy which is realized by North Korean authorities. What do we mean by foreign influences? We do consider, among other, the organization of international events in North Korea, which is done through, for instance, international movie festivals, which are occurring on a regular basis in Pyongyang, the capital of the so-called Democratic People Republic of Korea, the DPRK, which is the official name used by the North Korean government and North Korean diplomats when referring to North Korea. Other international events are sport events, such as the marathon that I mentioned, organization perhaps of conferences, non-political conferences, I underline it. Also the opening of press agencies, of foreign press agencies in Pyongyang, etc. Another precondition that may have an impact through the opening of window is the maintenance of relations, of discussions between North Korean citizens and foreigners. And unfortunately, when it comes to that, it seems that the North Korean state is fully aware that this maintained communication may lead to the realization of some projects which, in a longer perspective, could lead to the bankrupt or to the collapse of the North Korean state, at least under its current form. By making this introduction, we shall also consider by foreign influence, we shall consider also whether religion is a form of foreign influence which could jeopardize the North Korean state. So my perception or my conclusion is that the North Korean government is naturally considering religion as a way of jeopardizing the North Korean state, but also as an ideology, as a way of organizing the society which could maintain the North Korean regime. In other words, it does imply that religion, in spite of being forbidden to a certain extent in North Korea, is used as an organizational tool for the North Korean state. When we look to the religious framework in North Korea, we are fully aware that religion is a part of the Korean. When I say Korean, I do refer to the northern and to the southern part of the Korean peninsula. Religion was always present in the history of the Korean peninsula. Usually, when we look to research papers, especially by Westerners, we do have the wrong assumption that when Kim Il-sung was nominated as the Prime Minister of North Korea in 1946, immediately he decided to eradicate the religious landscape, religious tangible and intangible assets in North Korea. This approach, we must admit, is at least partially untrue, as between 1946 and at least 1953, religious tangible assets were to a certain extent maintained in the Korean peninsula. Probably when the Korean War was over in the summer 27 July 1953, North Korean authorities decided to reflect more on religions, as probably earlier they were more focusing on military, let me say, affairs within the context of the Korean War. But after 1953, probably some reflections were made by the North Korean state, and probably in collaboration with Soviet officials, Soviet ideologists, who meanwhile were present in North Korea. Meanwhile, all these ideologists from Soviet Union or even from China and from North Korea know that there is an important historical context in terms of religions in the Korean peninsula. Already in the late 19th century, American and Canadian missionaries established a Pyongyang theological seminary in order to train Korean pastors on a regular basis. Of course, if we go further in the past, we could evocate about Confucianism, Buddhism present in the Korean peninsula. This presence, even to some extent, and I will have the occasion to discuss it in a couple of minutes, is still present in the North Korean narrative process. In the early 20th century, the chosen Presbyterian Seminary was founded by American missionary, by Mr. Moffat, and it became the Korea oldest Christian school. This seminary was abolished during the Japanese occupation of the Korean peninsula, which took place between 1910 and 1945, and Christian private schools started to be closed, including any kind of religion institutions. After the Korean War, and taking into account the beginning of the anti-religious policy of Kim Il-sung, a certain number of refugees from North Korea who defected to South Korea through the bridge of no return, they participated rather than established, they participated to the creation of new institutions, of new religious institutions in South Korea, including the Jong-il University and Changchinde in Seoul in 1954. So Pyongyang, which was called the Jerusalem of West, or the Western Jerusalem, we have a certain framework, a certain number of tangible related to religious aspects. So I would say that the intangibility of these assets were moved from North Korea to South Korea through the establishment of several institutions, but also of North Korean organizations led by North Korean refugees. And here, I would like to underline, among others, the association of former alumni of Pyongyang colleges, which are on a regular basis preparing religious documents regarding the history of religions in the northern part of the Korean peninsula. So as we do see, the northern part of the Korean peninsula is a melting pot of is a cluster, I would say, of a certain number of religions which spread all over the North Korean peninsula till 1950, 1953. The cluster of Christianism, to some extent even, I would say, of Orthodoxism, a cluster of Korean syncretic religions, Confucianism, and Buddhism. This cluster, unfortunately, was highly regulated, reorganized by the North Korean leadership through a notable evolution of the state policy of North Korea, especially through official documents which tend to redefine what is religion and how religion could be used by the North Korean state. When we look to the first constitution of the DPA, constitution of 1948, religions, they were granted some kind of freedom of religious belief and conducting religious services to all citizens of the DPAK. Unfortunately, or fortunately, until 1953, this framework was partially realistic. However, when we look to the list of tangible assets, religious tangible assets, they were, I would say, not destroyed naturally by the clique, by the nomenclatura of Kim Il-sung, but were simply destroyed due to the atrocities of the Korean War. So the Korean War in itself naturally contributed to the destruction of religious tangible assets, which were not reconstructed by the new communist leadership of North Korea. That is why a certain number of institutions disappeared. Many pastors, religious figures were executed or were sent to re-education, I would say, rather, prison camp, including Pastor Francis, which is the most famous one. However, I underline that these destructions were not only a result of the Kim Il-sung policy, but also, unfortunately, a result of the massive destructions caused by the Korean War. In 1972, the new constitution, which was elaborated by North Korean authorities, modified the point really dealing with freedom of religious belief by adding that religions are not forbidden as long as it does not threat the North Korean state. Secondly, official dictionaries, so the chosen Sajon, for instance, dictionaries used to define religion as a tool of exploitation and aggression, which implied that religion may contribute rather to a declining development of the North Korean society. That is why religion still seems to be accepted by the North Korean state, but under a certain, let me say, paradigm and under some limitations, strictly controlled limitation, which would, let me say, which would limitate the North Korean society to take some advantages of religion aspects in their daily life. Starting from the 1980s, we can observe some strong modifications in the approach of the North Korean state when it does come to religion paradigm. In the 1980s, due to the complications, let me say, due to the increasing economic difficulties of the North Korean state, the authorities of Pyongyang decided to implement a new economic policy which would use some of its assets, which could improve the economic condition of the DPRK. Some of these assets which could be used are tangible ones, which were reconstructed by the North Korean state, including some churches, such as the Chilgol one in Pyongyang, including the erection, of course, later, the Orthodox Church in Pyongyang in the mid-2000s, but also by inviting a certain number of monks to North Korea, also by implementing the topic of religion in some North Korean movies. So religion was present more officially in the discussion in the North Korean, let me say, framework. By inviting a certain number of monks under the pretext of the unification of the Korean church, unification of the Buddhism council, the North Korean state wanted to bring some funds in exchange of, let me say, relative opening of its country when it does come to religious elements, religious topics to some extent. That is why, starting from 1980s, the opening of North Korea cannot be fully considered as an opening on religion elements, but only an opening of religion elements in exchange of a financial support from, among other, but not only, South Korean organizations and also Korean organizations based, among others, in the United States of America. So this adjustment led to a new approach of the North Korean government toward the religious paradigm. Of course, the religious influence, as I mentioned in my introduction, is strictly could be observed when we look to the Kim dynasty consisting of Kim Il-sung, the eternal president of North Korea, to Kim Jong-il and to the later, the current one leader, Kim Jong-un. The Kim Il-sung family, of course, was deeply connected to Christianity, to Christianism. His father, the father of Kim Il-sung, Kim Hyung-jik, attended, among others, a school which was founded by Protestant missionaries. Moreover, Kang Dong-wook, the Kim Il-sung maternal grandfather, was one of the elders of the Chilgol Church, a school which is an institution which is located in the Goyang, in the Goyang, let me say, of Kim Il-sung, in Mangyongdae, the most populated district of Pyongyang. So, taking in account these elements, taking in account the background also of the mother of Kim Il-sung, there is a certain influence on Kim Il-sung which was established in his mind when he was a child, so around the 1920s, 1930s, before he stepped out from North Korea and moved for a certain time to the Soviet Union and China. So this religious paradigm showed that Kim Il-sung demonstrated a certain degree of awareness of the religion power and how it could present a threat to the North Korean ideology. That is why we have to some extent, some religious elements which were implemented to some extent, into the religious ideology. To which kind of elements I am thinking? We do have, for instance, the fact that there is a single leader under the person of Kim Il-sung, which is always depicted in the North Korean ideology, a leader which has a certain number of characteristics, a benevolent person, a person who is focusing, who is taking care of the population, a leader who had the answer to all kind of questions. Even yesterday, when I was focusing on some North Korean literature, I was even able to notice that Kim Il-sung was, according, of course, to the North Korean propaganda, I underline it, a genuine leader, but also a specialist of the choreo medicine, a specialist on sports, a master of chess, and of course, a person who wrote dozens of thousands of pages during his entire life. So the person of the god, there is a certain degree of mystification, let me say, of Kim Il-sung, which may be compared to a personification of a religious leader, or if we would prefer, a religious god, which is presented initially under the form of Kim Il-sung and even maintained till 2025, in spite of the fact that Kim Il-sung passed away in 1994. Even recently, in mid-April, we had the 113, let me say, anniversary of the birth of Kim Il-sung, and there are still some oratory contests where people are praising the geniusity of Kim Il-sung in spite of the fact that he passed away already 31 years ago. When we come more deeply in our topic, so in a paradigm where religion are controlled by the North Korean state, how can it lead to the development of religious studies in North Korea? So from one side, we must know that already in 1987, there is a certain department, and the question here, a question that I still need to develop, can we say that a department of religious studies, or is it only a section of a certain faculty which was created at the Kim Il-sung University, at Kimdae University in Pyongyang? So what is important is that religious studies are developed not under the form of a philosophy, but rather as an element of the history of the Korean peninsula. So any metaphysical consideration related to religion, whatever the religion is, whatever the religious pattern are we discussing about, there is a larger focus on historical elements, and among other, when we look to biographies of Kim Il-sung, we can observe that religion is considered as a threat or as a driver of the collapse of some dynasties in the Korean peninsula, as Confucianism is considered as a part of feudalistic movement which led, among other, to the collapse of major Koryo dynasties and chosen dynasties in the Korean peninsula. That is why the study of religion is highly dealing with critics which are underlined, which are demonstrated by North Korean scholars dealing with religion studies. As I mentioned also, starting from the 1980s, there were some major changes in the policy of the North Korean state, where, due to a lack of financial funds, the North Korean state decided to open the country, but under some limited conditions, to foreign instructors who were supposed to teach in North Korea, to provide rather some lectures. And again, here I need to reassess what was the content of this lecture and what was the audience of such lectures. Among other, I would like to underline the position and the person of the deceased now Billy Graham, who was a pastor who who was involved in the opening policy of North Korea. This pastor, interestingly, his grandfather, if I'm not wrong, also gave a Christian name to the person of Kim Il-sung, the grandfather of Billy Graham, was serving in Pyongyang in the 30s of the previous century. When it comes to religious studies, we should here consider whether these religious studies were realized, to which extent these religious studies were realized, but we know, based on some defectors, that a lot of candidates, a lot of North Korean future students wanted to study in the department or in the section of religious studies of the Kim Il-sung University, and it was possible to to have some interactions with foreigners, which was especially important in the 80s and in the 90s. So the problem for me, the essential problem, is that we have from one side some religious studies which are focusing on the threat which is represented by religions. On the other side, we have some churches existing, especially in Pyongyang, but not only in Pyongyang, but also in the city of Changjin, where we can feel in the atmosphere in some part of the city an orthodox, let me say, atmosphere. I would say that there are some silent churches. The wording of silent churches is quite important here because it demonstrates that the tangible assets are existing, tangible assets which were reconstructed by, as we see in the North Korean press, by budget funded by the Workers' Party of North Korea, the Rodong-jang, although also named in more contemporary terms as the Communist Party. So these silent churches are existing, but does it mean that they are made available to the population on a regular basis? Well, we can doubt over that, as I guess that there are no, let me say, community engagement, a community engagement which is so vital for the maintenance of religious institutions. So religious tangible assets which are studied by those who are in religious department of North Korea, they are more created as attractions which are supposed to be made available not only to foreign tourists, but also to foreign delegations, especially from South Korea and from organizations dealing with Korean based in the United States of America. However, to this deification of the leadership, which is existing in North Korea, is how the religion is used, let me say, by North Korean authorities. However, and I would like to, let me say, underline it, religions are existing in North Korean publication, but also in discussions among citizens. Of course, the fact that religions could be discussed among the North Korean population can be also judged as being true, however, only partially. Those who are aware of the structure of the North Korean society, even on a micro scale, know that the principle of the Inminban are existing, where the Inminban process consists of the fact that within one building consisting of approximately 6 to 10 flats, or within a micro district consisting up to 8 or 10 houses, there is one person who is controlling, to some extent, the discussion of those who are habitating such urbanist or non-urbanist structure, and these discussions are later transmitted to some kind of North Korean control organizations affiliated with the Workers' Party of North Korea, or with what do we call the Bowibu, the secret police of North Korea. So people are aware of religions. Some of them are discussing about religions, but there is still this element of pressure coming either from the Inminbad or from the Weibo. In any case, when we look deeper into North Korean publication, and that's also one of my subjects of my future research trip, which will take place in South Korea in a couple of months, we can observe that in some North Korean research journals, there are some information, some documents, and that will be my purpose to assess its quality, to assess whether these documents are true or not. Documents which are available, and I will quote the name of these research papers translated in English, such as Chosen Archaeological Research, such as The Chosen Yezel or The Chosen Art, publication dealing with the natural cultural heritage, or publication by North Korean defectors through the Association of the Alumni of Schools or Colleges, rather, of Pyongyang. However, these publications are rather fragments or especially historical, let me say, historical elements associated to religious tangible assets. And therefore, I will consider that those studying religious elements in North Korea and based at Kimdae, at the Kim Il-sung University, they are more focused on the history of religions than on the philosophical elements. I remember through one of my discussions with a former North Korean diplomat who later defected abroad, he told me that even during his education at Kimdae or at the Pyongyang University of Foreign Studies, there are some elements of religions which are transmitted to North Korean students. However, these elements are only implemented in order to be able to discuss it with foreign delegations. And in any case, they are not used in order to establish, I would say, a religious consciousness. However, I still consider that the discussions which are made toward the North Korean population, also the fact that religious elements are present in books, in foreign books made available to the North Korean population, especially masterpieces of Tolstoy available at the Grand Library of Pyongyang, these elements all inputted all together, or the presence of religious aspect in North Korean movies, especially of Buddhism aspects, can be considered as a booster, as something which is creating discussion among the population and as establishing on a long-term perspective the awareness toward religions. This awareness may lead to future research questions that I cannot present as of today, questions related to, and questions that I am already discussing about, and that I'm preparing in my future monograph, which will be prepared within a couple of months, dealing with architectural tangible assets which remain in North Korea, with the cultural heritage of this country, with its implication for the society, and with the fact that the North Korean state policy is not able to control, let me say, the mind of each citizen, especially the access to foreign broadcasts, which we know is made available for those North Korean based close to the Chinese border or to the South Korean border. So, in a mindset where South Korean programs or K-drama would implement a certain number of religious elements, and these documents would be made available to the North Korean population, perhaps this would lead to a re-emergence, I underline, a re-emergence of a religious consciousness through the North Korean population, which, and also I would like to focus on, would not mean that the North Korean state will collapse, but it would mean that the North Korean state, whatever its form would be, will have to accept the existence of religion among the North Korean society, but still considering that religious organizations cannot participate to the reorganization of a state which would collapse in the future. That is why I think that what is doing currently the Workers' Party of Korea by reconstructing some churches, by increasing the number of publications, not only in Korean, but also in non-Korean languages related to the religious tangible assets of its country, bring some positive outcomes to the of course, limited positive outcomes, I underline it, for the development of what do we call the freedom, perhaps not of religious speech, but freedom of religious own thinking process. Thank you. I hope that you were interested by these religious aspects toward the North Korean society, by the availability of some limited, of course, North Korean publications dealing with religion, and by keeping in mind that religion studies in North Korea does exist, but especially through the historical paradigm and not through philosophical considerations. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for that thought-provoking presentation, Dr. Levy. Your work offers a valuable lens into the cultural, religious, and political dynamics of North Korea, and we truly appreciate your sharing today. At this point, to enrich our discussion, we have invited a discussant who will offer the reflection and raise key points that build on Dr. Levy's talk. So, Assistant Professor Leandro G. Piga is a faculty member of the Division of Social Sciences at the University of the Philippines Tacloban College, where he also serves as the coordinator of the Political Science program. Professor Piga's research interests lie in international political economy, the political economy of development, agriculture and community-based organization, and agrarian reform. He earned his bachelor's degree in social sciences, major in political science from UP Tacloban in 2015. In 2020, he was awarded the prestigious Asian Development Bank Japan Scholarship Program to pursue his graduate studies at the International University of Japan, where he obtained his master's degree in international relations in 2022. Please join me in welcoming Assistant Professor Leandro G. Piga.
Hi everyone. Am I audible? Um, Thank you so much, Dr. Levy, for that insightful talk on North Korea as well as the documentation sources of documentation in religious studies. I don't, as emphasized by Dr. Dean Arinto as well as um, Dr. Levy earlier, we do not commonly hear about North Korea, or when we hear it in Korean dramas, in the entertain in the in the media industry coming from South Korea, but we rarely hear from North Korea and everything about
Something broke here.
particularly religious in the Philippine setting particularly. We only especially that I'm teaching political science, we only cover South Korea as well as a little bit of North Korea, and we don't actually
Mhm.
delve deeper into religious
Mhm.
studies.
Unfortunately, there is something which is broken in the sound.
So this is this lecture is very important. Am I audible?
Okay, I was thinking it's on his side. So perhaps,
Okay.
Leandro,
We get to have a better sense of what religious the role of religion in North Korea, especially in the system maintenance, if I may say so, if of the existing power structures in North Korea.
Assistant Professor Leandro, could you write your question on the chat? There is a little, let me say,
Hello.
fluctuation over your internet connection,
Okay.
unfortunately, if you don't mind. But in any case, meanwhile, before answering to the question that I unfortunately was not able to fully consider, there is still something which is coming to my mind in the context of Philippines, which is considered as an extremely Christian country, as a country which is influenced to a large extent by religions, which is also influencing the policy of its leader. We could observe what happened in the past with the former head of state on his engagement or attachment toward the religion. Of course, I'm not unfortunately, I don't have the possibility to follow what is going on Philippines on a daily basis, but I still have in my mind this, I would say, religious impact on the society in your country, a religious impact which perhaps in the future, perhaps the question of generation could take place also in the future in North Korea, but still under the control of the North Korean state. That's only one critical thinking which came to my mind. But meanwhile, could you write your question once again on our internal chat, Mr. Or could you repeat it? Perhaps now the connection will be better. We will be perfect even.
Right. I just got back from the internet interruption. I'd like to emphasize, Dr. Levy, that it's quite interesting for us to actually learn that North Korea is more quasi-totalitarian than more totalitarian
Definitely.
by definition, especially as well how in the earlier stages of North Korean development, religion faced some was cracked down by the North Korean government. Um, to cut short some of the things that I will be saying, one important question I think that I'd like to ask is, in more contemporary periods, how diverse are these religious organizations in North Korea? If I can be more specific, what is the more dominant religion? What are the smallest religious institutions, as well as what actually drives their dominance in this in as religious institutions in North Korea. Because I think that it's quite important to see as well how, let's say, for example, what you introduced earlier, that in the lineage or in the roots of of the Kim dynasty, it has largely
Mm-hmm.
been influenced by by Christianity, from the
Mm-hmm.
maternal as well as the paternal side of Kimism.
Definitely. Okay. So first of all, the idea that North Korea is not a totalitarian state, but because per definition, a totalitarian state would indicate that the state is able to control each field, each activity of its society, which per definition, if we use the word total, is impossible to be realized. I use for this idea the principle of the most famous French researcher on Korean studies, on not even I would say on North Korean studies, Patrick Maurice, who is regularly going to Pyongyang, to North Korea, and who underlined that we cannot say the North Korean state is able to control any field of activities, but however, the North Korean state is doing its best by having a certain degree of control, even on a micro scale, as I mentioned with the concept of Inminbad. So we would like to reflect more to your question in terms of organization, in terms of presence of religions in North Korea. The most important religion would be Buddhism, especially in terms of tangible assets. A list of tangible assets was prepared by North Korean Heritage, and it does include a dozen of Buddhism tangible assets, which are available not only for foreigners, but also for North Korean people who would like to visit them. This list, unfortunately, I get it had around 200 tangible assets, has of course some assets dealing with Confucianism, where it does include some temples. It does have a couple of assets dealing with the Chondongyo, the Chondoist religion. It does have also a certain number of assets which unfortunately are more related to political activities. So this list of assets, this list of cultural assets are of course more focused on political elements, places which were established, places which were visited or created by those belonging, I would say, even to the Kim family. But there are also some places dealing with religion, with religious tangible assets, places which are, and that's important, available to foreigners, but also since 20, 30 years available to the North Korean population. Second element, out of this couple of religions that I mentioned, a fact which must be underlined is that religions which are existing, they are of course organized under the form of some council. There is a council of religions which is controlling the activities of each of the sub-religion that I mentioned, such as Christianism, including Orthodox Church, but also Protestantism, Chondoism, Buddhism, and Confucianism, if we consider it as a religion. But unfortunately, this council of religion is not an independent institution. There are no connection with the Pope, with the Catholic state of the Vatican. These organizations are connected with the Workers' Party of Korea. So there is still a political element when it comes to the control of the activities of this religion. I underline also the relationship with the Pope, which is not existing between the Christian organization in North Korea and the Vatican state. It's true that in the 90s, in the 20s, the North Korean state, especially through its embassy in Rome, in Italy, they tried to invite the Pope to Pyongyang. But the Vatican state always say no, and later the North Korean state also, through discussion with former North Korean officials, they said that if we would invite the Pope to North Korea, we would accept religion as an important matter of the North Korean, also of the North Korean society, and what may be the consequences later for the North Korean population, but also for the what is important in terms of education, what we are supposed to teach for the, I would say, implementation of the critical thinking process, a critical thinking that we are supposed to transmit to our students through our education activities, and perhaps the invitation of the Pope or the independent of the religious council that I mentioned previously may lead to an improvement, an increase of this critical thinking, which perhaps, I underline perhaps, may threat to a micro degree the North Korean state.
Thank you so much for your response, Dr. Levi.
Thank
Um,
you.
that was really a very interesting case for Christian denominations in North Korea, especially that they are, if I understood it correctly, more distant to the Catholic and or to the Christian organizations outside of North Korea. I will not
Yeah,
take away so
definitely.
much time from this discussion, but I'm looking forward actually to the insight as well as the questions coming from the members of the audience for this forum.
Yes, I still have one reflection which came to my mind because, as I mentioned it earlier, we have in the mind of the former leader of North Korea, Kim Il-sung, which was highly influenced by an ideology, a religious ideology coming from his parents. And I guess that in Filipina it's similar. There is a strong form of respect toward the old elders, toward parents, and so on. So your parents transmitted to you some values, and you, as a leader, later, you have to say that these values cannot be transmitted to the population. And I get that to some extent, even partially, it led to Kim Il sung. He has some questions toward himself that what he was taught by his parents, he cannot transmit it to future generations. That's just a psychological element which come to my mind
Right.
here. But we see how religious, how the education which are bringing the older generation may even impact not only political efforts and in the case of Kim Il-sung, but also our future decisions, whatever the scale is.
Right. Right. Thank you so much, Dr.
Welcome.
Levy.
Thank you very much.
All right, so thank you, Assistant Professor Leandro and Dr. Levy, for the points you've raised. We are receiving an overwhelming amount of feedback from our students at UP Tacloban, both on Facebook and in our YouTube live stream. So now we will move to the open forum. We now invite questions and comments from our audience. So Ma'am Pam can flash the questions that okay. The first question from Mark Louis Borja. Good day, Dr. Levy. What are the potential implications of recent religious changes in North Korea on its future foreign policy? And could openness signal a willingness to engage with the world? And or is it merely a minor policy adjustment?
Um, First of all, I would like also to refer to one term which to some extent will illustrate the answer. On the first slide of my presentation, the second slide exactly, there was a picture which I took on my essay, which is the Kwangbok Temple in Pyongyang. That's a temple, yeah, this one exactly. Thank you. That's a temple which used to be open only for foreigners until the 2007, I guess, 2010, but later it started to be open also to North Korean citizens, and especially those who were based in Pyongyang, as its localization, at the localization of this Buddhist temple is close to the Daesung Mount, which is close to Pyongyang. So there is a certain degree of openness. I would say that the North Korean government is more leading a policy where they implement some changes, they see what are the consequences, but it does not mean that they will maintain it on a long-term perspective. When it comes, for instance, in comparison with some economic reforms which took place after 1996, when North Korea faced some drastic consequences of famine, of bad meteorological conditions, they implemented a certain number of reforms. We call it the Jong, where markets were more open, people were able to sell products that they produce on their own. But the North Korean government saw that this degree of liberalism was too important and decided to cut off some kind of these reforms and to switch back to the former paradigm. So per comparison here, if North Korean state decided to enlarge, I would say, the number of tangible assets, of religious tangible assets available to the population, first, it does not mean that they will maintain it on a long-term perspective. Secondly, they may restrict the access to these tangible assets to a certain part of the population. But thirdly, it would indicate that the North Korean state is trying to adapt itself to world trends, let me say, to adapt itself, taking in account this its needs in terms of funds. Because I still believe that the opening of the religion policy of North Korea is not driven, let me say, by a willingness of being more open to the world, but rather there is an economic driver. There is an economic driver where if North Korea open more tangible assets, perhaps there will be more tourists from abroad, which indicate that they will allocate more of their funds in the economy of North Korea, which will be beneficial, positive for the North Korean economy. But on the other side, this opening in terms of North Korean assets is automatically leading to the implementation of discussions among North Korean citizens. Even if we observe North Korean defectors, when they arrive to South Korea, they tend to reorganize them through churches. Not because churches are, in a way, it's true, they are helping them financially, but also there is this critical religious thinking which existed in North Korea, which is again reproduced while being in South Korea. So in any case, the policy of North Korea when it comes to religious will bring some positive benefits to the population. However, it's still complicated to fully measure it. From my side, I try to measure it. I try to connect to hundreds of North Korean scholars. However, the number of people who answer from North Korea, so the final sample, is too weak, and do not allow my scientific consciousness to bring some valuable, let me say, conclusions.
Thank you, Dr. Levy. For the second question from Rochelle Ann Mallorca, how
Yep.
does North Korean government stance on religion affect foreign aid or investment from religious organizations or countries with strong religious communities?
So simply, if we take the case of South Korea, where the feeling of religion is important, especially toward Confucianism, to a lower extent toward Christian religion, I would say that simply the North Korean government, when they do get some funds or some tangible even assets from this country, in the case of South Korea, they simply modify the name of the organization which is providing the funds. They don't want to say that it does come from a South Korean religious organization. They would rather say that it does come from a friendly country, rather. So there is a modification in the nomination, let me say, in the appellation, rather, of the organization which is providing some funds to the North Korean state. Also, I would say that sometimes these organizations are named by the North Korean propaganda, so the population is aware that the organization are existing and supplementing the North Korean state. But for instance, when we had the World Youth Congress in 1989, which took place in Pyongyang, the capital of North Korea, there were some leading Hmong delegation, South Korean delegation, which came to North Korea. But the question is, which is important, at least for me, is are people able to discuss about it? Because I'm sure that among the North Korean society, such questions emerge later. We do have some monks from South Korea. There are some religious delegations. Why we don't have our own delegation, our representation, our organizations. However, there is still the notion of inminban, the control over these discussions, which was in this period of time still very present in the North Korean society. And I get that these discussions were not able to spread to a larger, let me say, scale, but definitely a certain number of discussions emerged meanwhile.
All right. For the next question, can religion be one of the solutions or play a significant role in reconciliation or peace talks between North and South Korea?
As of 2025, or even taking into account the policy of Kim Jong-un as of 2024, the North Korean leader said recently that the reunification more precisely, is not possible between both Koreas. However, in this question, I notified the word of reconciliation, which does not mean reunification, because as of now, there are still a chaotic relationship between both countries. We know that Kim Jong-un last year, through his aggressive discourse towards South Korea, present South Korea not as a potential friendly country, but as a threat to the North Korean regime. And in such context, any discussion toward a reunification of Korea are made impossible. So a lot of monuments were destroyed in Pyongyang, monuments which were dedicated to a potential reunification of the Korean peninsula were destroyed. The discussion about it in the North Korean press stopped totally. And we more see that the North Korean state is having an aggressive policy toward the South Korean state, especially in the era of the previous head of state of South Korea, President Yoon, who also wanted to implement an aggressive foreign policy toward the North Korean state. But so unification is impossible, and whatever religious organization wanted to do, perhaps in the past there would be I would say that the religious organization would have a function of calming, stepping down the aggressive narrative of North Korea. Because when we discuss whatever the organization is, religious or non-religious, by discussing with the North Korean state, unfortunately or fortunately, so here it's a subjective approach, we tend to accept the existence of the North Korean state. And by discussing with the North Korean state, we make further the potential risk of an escalation of the beginning of a nuclear war, which is possible because we do know that the DPRK is owning some impressive, I would say even, nuclear and not only nuclear capabilities. So yes, religion organization may have a role in stamping down the aggressive rhetoric of North Korea. That is absolutely true. When it comes to reconciliation, I would say that in the context of the aggressive narrative of Kim Jong-un, it seems to be hard that two countries could be reconciliated on a short-term approach. However, little steps, and now the latest opening of North Korea may indicate that in the close future, more religion, foreign delegation, and also from Russia. I underline it due to the strong relationship between Russia and North Korea. So, well, it may have an impact on at least drawing the future policy of the North Korean state. The question is, could the Orthodox Church of Russia ask to North Korean authorities to continue to have an aggressive rhetoric towards South Korea? I am afraid, unfortunately, that yes. Why? Simply because the Orthodox Church of Russia is naturally affiliated to, let me say, Kremlin, to the Putin governance.
From Blair Willows, given the heavy emphasis on architectural and historical studies, how might future research shift towards understanding the social structure or lived religious experiences of ordinary North Koreans? And what methodologies could safely explore these aspects without endangering participants?
So let me first, because the question is impressive and interesting. There is a point dealing with methodology, and the first one, heavy emphasis, yes. So when we speak about lived, so as Blair Willows underlined, and as I said, there is a strong emphasis on architectural and historical studies when it comes to the religious background or heritage in North Korea. So when it comes to lived religious experiences of ordinary North Koreans, the simple answer which comes to my mind is to be able to discuss with North Korean defectors, with North Korean citizens who are living abroad. Not only those who are living in South Korea, however, they represent the majority of North Korean defectors, but also those who are living in third-party countries, such as in Canada, in the UK, in Germany, and some of them also are living in France. And this population, which is no more controlled by, let me say, any North Korean organization, they are able to provide any elements regarding their past religious experience. When it comes to the methodology which could be safely, which could be used here, well, it is a method. It is first of all a certain number of sample surveys, open and non-open and direct and indirect questions, which could be done, interviews. However, these interviews, as I underline, could be made with North Korean citizens who are living abroad here. So within this context, there are no endangering aspects which could threaten the life of these participants.
Okay, from Paris, Catherine, are there any correlations between regions with known underground religious activity and economic behaviors like resistance to state controls or increased market activity?
Let me see, are there any correlation between regions? Regions with underground, yes, I still need to write questions because by writing we are learning also. Something which tends to be forgotten by a certain number of students. Regions and underground religious activities, yes, and economic behavior. That's so I would say that we can observe, yes, that from one side there are some underground religious activities, especially in in the North Pyongyang, in provinces. North Korea is divided into 9 provinces. So in provinces which are close to China. And in this region also, we can observe the most liberal activities. Why? Because there is one river which is separating China from North Korea, the Yalu one, where goods tends to be exported to North Korea either through the railway infrastructure or through the utilization of little boats which are switching from the Chinese river to the North Korean border through the Yalu river. But does it mean that there is a relationship? I would say rather that there is a correlation between both. We can observe these two phenomena in the same region. I'm sure that I would like to say that could we separate I would say, philosophical liberalism from economic liberalism? I'm not totally sure that we could separate it. And those who have a more liberal behavior in terms of economic activities, surely they have a more at least developed critical thinking approach, which may indicate that they are more open to religious activities. So yes, there is a correlation, perhaps not a consequence, but there is surely a state of mind, a certain mindset, which indicate that liberal activities would indicate that the population is less afraid, let me say, of dealing with religious activities.
So we have two more questions, and then we will end the open forum. So
Surely.
from Aika, good afternoon. What are the limitations and ethical considerations when using North Korean sources, especially those published by the state in religious studies?
I would say that if I would be a researcher, I would prefer to study butterflies in Filipino instead of studying the North Korean state. As the North Korean state, as we know, is perhaps not a totalitarian state, but a quasi-totalitarian state, as I mentioned, but at least is a pariah state, which a certain number of its economic activities, of course, activities which are not led by the population, but by a selected number of people, are illegal activities which should not be realized by this, let me say, selected North Korean nomenclatura. So automatically, it does mean that North Korean sources, they do have, especially North Korean sources, which are under the control of state organization, such at least the Pyongyang Chalpunza, the Pyongyang Publishing House. There are some limitations, but these limitations, and perhaps because limitation should be indicated at the beginning of the preparation, for instance, of a monograph. When it comes to ethical consideration, here it does depend. What do we define by ethical? What are the borders that we are able to accept when preparing some studies? In this field, I would say that are we able to use some publication which are prepared by other pariah state or quasi at least pariah state? So of course, there are some consideration to be taken. There are some limitations, but what is important is to read between lines, because the fact, for instance, of publishing about the heritage of the North Korean, about North Korean religion in North Korea, even if controlled by the publishing house, for instance, of the Workers' Party of Korea, indicate that the North Korean state is aware of its legacy. It's aware of the religious legacy of North Korea, and it does indicate that there is somewhere something which is forcing the authorities to discuss about it because they are not able to hide it, or because they can use it for a specific purpose, as I mentioned previously, at least for a financial purpose. So yes, there are some limitations, but on the other side, this publication and there are some publications, especially in the North Korean, I would say, in the North Korean belles lettres literature, which indicate that religion is a part of the North Korean society and cannot be, at the difference of Albania, cannot be fully destroyed from a clear understanding of the North Korean society. That's the
So
last
we
question, I
apologize.
guess.
Yeah. We apologize for an enthusiastic audience. So this will be the last question. Maybe you can email Dr. Levy for your queries after this discussion.
Definitely.
Yeah. So, to what extent can North Korean sources on religion be considered reliable given the state's history of propaganda and censorship?
Again, what do we mean by reliable, especially in a world where the manipulation of information is coming from each side, whatever whatever our political views are, here it is our critical thinking, which allow us to draw, let me say, some conclusion. So when it comes to the reliability, I would use the argument dealing with the repetition, excuse me, of some historical facts through the literature, the verification of the historical fact, the possibility of visiting these tangible assets, the possibility of discussing with the North Korean with North Korean defectors, also perhaps the possibility of discussing North Korean religious assets with selected North Korean citizens who are based in or outside the country. I'm not talking here about North Korean defectors. There is, of course, a certain degree of propaganda, of censorship, but this censorship is not always reliable, efficient, and still we are able to read between lines in order to draw some crucial conclusions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Levy. On behalf of the organizing committee, we extend our sincere gratitude to all participants for your active engagement during the open forum. Your thoughtful questions and valuable insights have significantly enriched the discussion and contribution to the overall success of this session. So now I will hand the floor to Dr. Kyungmin Bae, the director of the Korean Research Center at the University of the Philippines, for the awarding of certificates.
Hello, Dr. Nicola. Thank you so much. And we hopefully can see you in the Philippines soon in person. So let us award the Certificate of Appreciation to Dr. Nicola Levy for presenting his paper entitled An Overview of North Korean Resources of Documentation Related to Religious Studies at the 2025 UPKRC and UP Tacloban College special online lecture held at the University of the Philippines, Quezon City, Philippines, virtually. And this is awarded on the 21st of April 2025. Thank you so much for your insights and time.
Thank you very much again. Thank you for the organization of this event. And I expect that we'll have the occasion to meet also in the future. Thank you very much again.
See you soon.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, as we draw this program to a close, we would like to extend our heartfelt thanks to everyone who joined us today. Our deepest appreciation goes to Dr. Nicola Levy for his enlightening lecture, as well as to our discussant and all participants who contributed to our rich and meaningful exchange of ideas. We also thank the organizing team, our partners, and everyone behind the scenes who made this event possible. May today's discussion inspire further inquiry, collaboration, and dialogue as we continue to engage with critical global and regional issues. Once again, thank you for being with us. We look forward to welcoming you to our future events. For more updates and upcoming events, don't forget to visit the UPKRC and UP Tacloban Facebook page and website. Keep safe and have a pleasant day ahead. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. 감사합니다.
바이바이. 감사합니다.